Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 9 of season 1 of Star Trek Strange New Ripoffs, Worlds. And I think I mostly disliked this episode mostly because it had pretty much zero originality, zero imagination, and was a complete ripoff of all the Alien movies put together with some touches of Predator and Jurassic Park and another blatant contradiction with the continuity of TOS because the Gorn are now literally xenomorphs who can easily kill humans even when they're babies, and they burst out of people like chest bursters and are complete monsters which you cannot possibly make any kind of peace with, and it literally almost eats all of the Enterprise's crew, and yet Kirk, the next commander of the Enterprise, never heard about them. He never knew who the Gorn are, even though his own ship fought them and half his own crew were almost eaten by them, and yet he never heard about it. So why didn't they just make it a totally different kind of alien instead of making it the Gorn? And so this is ridiculous in my opinion. And the episode itself was not just a homage and all of that. You know, I made many videos complaining about how many times Star Trek Discovery borrowed ideas from other movies and other shows, but it was always a little from this, a little from that, and just mixing it together. It was never a whole episode just copying a totally different movie. Maybe the closest example was that episode in Discovery when Michael was like Bruce Willis, killing the bad guys and taunting them on the radio and all of that, but at least that episode, even though it was obviously a ripoff of Die Hard, but at least it put a twist on it because it was all in a science fiction setting, so it was very similar, but with some kind of difference, some kind of twist on it, so it was kind of transformative and not a complete copy. And yet here it's literally a complete copy of Alien in every single way, and yet not as good, and so it just made me want to go back and watch Aliens again. And as I said in some of my reviews of the Orville, I was also complaining that the Orville is kind of copying too much from previous stuff, and I said that I don't have a problem with it as a viewer as long as they improve something. If they recycle the same idea, they should at least make it more entertaining in some way. So either make it as a parody, make jokes out of it, or surprise us somehow, or at least make it better in some way. Then it's like a good remake. But that is very difficult to do if they take something which was awesome in the first place and they just make a cheaper copy of it. Then it's not really entertaining, it's just annoying to me. And I don't mind the occasional homages, the occasional references to all kinds of other stuff. If you only have one line or one scene which is similar to some movie, then it's not a big deal. Even Star Trek TNG, in the episode Conspiracy, which was one of my favorite episodes when I was a kid, had that scene of the Queen creature emerging from Remik, which was also similar to Alien. I guess it was probably inspired by it, but it was only one scene out of a whole episode. And here we have a whole episode which is bit to bit exactly identical to Alien. So even the planet's surface with those spiky mountains looks just like the planet from Alien. The chest bursters are exactly the same, and then they grow up really quickly and they run on the walls to try to eat the crew, and Spock tries to use an electrical rod just like in Alien 1. And all of this is taking place on another starship which crashed on the surface, and it accidentally transmitted a distress call, but then they find out the captain of that ship actually wanted to send out a warning, so just like in the first Alien. And they find the little girl there who survived there all by herself somehow, so that's basically Newt. But in Aliens it was much better because she wasn't just an extra in that movie, she was a big part of the story, of the emotional core of the movie, because of her connection with the main character Ripley, who overcame all her fears because she kind of tapped into her maternal instinct and tried to save Newt at all cost and all of that, so that was a very big part of that movie. Newt wasn't there just to be there, like this girl here, who is here just to remind us of Newt, and so that's why I say this is a lesser, inferior copy of the same ideas. It's basically just a ton of references. And they also add the stuff with Spock being scared all of a sudden, Spock cannot control his emotions, and that kind of stuff happened in the original series as well, but it only happened very rarely, which made it so shocking when it did. And yet, in all the recent Star Trek shows ever since the JJ movie, Spock was an emotional wreck who cannot control his emotions every second episode. And we have a scene of him trying to catch the alien, and he gets angry and starts hitting all the walls, just like Ripley in Alien 3 when she tries to provoke the alien. And the Noonien Singh lady is like Ripley in this scenario because she's the only one who fought these aliens in the past. And so she knows what to do, so everyone listens to her, and so Even Pike asks her what to do, like he's the captain and yet he constantly takes orders from her. And that has been the case since the start of this season. Where is his command presence exactly? And it also reminds me of the scene in the beginning of the episode when once again he's cooking for the crew and then he's washing the dishes and then he gets Spock to help him wash the dishes while the ladies only eat the food, while the men service them. And so that kind of scene I was okay with for a few times, but now it's became like a pattern in the show that Pike is constantly in the kitchen every 2 episodes and he has to manually do the dishes, which makes no sense because, I can get the fact that some people simply enjoy making food by hand because it's like a hobby of them, just like Riker in TNG and Cisco in Deep Space Nine, who loved making real food because it was a hobby of them, but who would want to wash dishes as a hobby? So how come they don't have any robots that do that? I mean, we saw pretty advanced robots being on the Enterprise in the last episode of Season 2 of Discovery. So where are all those droids now? Why did they disappear? And we saw cleaning droids in Discovery, and yet Pike and Spock have to do the dishes after cooking for the crew. And so I can't help thinking this is just one of those little agendas that they try to insert into all of this, and it's done in such a way that is distracting from the story, like he is giving a briefing while doing the dishes and I cannot concentrate on what he's actually saying because I'm thinking of how ridiculous all of this is. And there was a promotion ceremony of some ensign we never saw before, and what a surprise that he's the first one who gets eaten by the Goran xenomorphs when they're on the planet. And whenever we see the aliens attacking people, they always show us from their perspective and they see things like the predator, they see the heat signature, and they even make the same predator kind of noises. And they also spit some kind of acid at people, which blinds them, just like that dinosaur in Jurassic Park, who blinded a guy by spitting something at him. And we also have Sam Kirk on the away team, and that's the part that did kind of made me laugh because that was kind of funny. When he starts behaving like Hudson from Aliens, he's the one who gets the most nervous and all of that. And the reason I found it so funny because it ties perfectly to the fact that I think this character was kind of inspired by a guy from Galaxy Quest, who was constantly nervous in Galaxy Quest because he knew he's just a glorified extra and constantly thought he's going to be the one who dies first on any away mission, and so he was constantly being nervous throughout that movie. And I mentioned before that I think they took that character as an inspiration for Sam Kirk, and it's funny because Sam Kirk in the original Star Trek show was basically a glorified extra when they went to some planet and found him dead because he was killed by some aliens, and it was basically a meaningless extra who they simply decided to make it Kirk's brother to make it more emotional for Kirk, I guess. And the funniest part in that TOS episode was that Sam was played by Shatner himself, and they just gave him a mustache so that he wouldn't look too much like him, I guess. And it's funny that Spock never mentioned in that scene that he also knew him very well because he used to serve on the Enterprise a few years previously. No one ever mentioned that in that TOS episode, so that's another kind of strange continuity issue. But anyway, I did kind of love his character here because I just found it funny how they made him like Guy from Galaxy Quest, and now he's also like Hudson from Aliens, which was a perfect combination because they were kind of similar. And it's also similar to Galaxy Quest because we know that he's not really a glorified extra, because we know he's not going to die until TOS, of course, in which he does become a glorified extra, but until then he's basically a comic relief character who thinks he's going to die any moment, but we know that he won't. And so that makes him a fun character to watch because he's constantly so nervous and scared. And here he's doing a Hudson imitation. They really should have had him say, "It's game over, man, it's game over." And then they set a trap for the aliens and they run in the corridors to try to get some of them. And then the last one, they managed to freeze somehow. So that was also similar to the end of Alien 3 when they poured molten lava on an alien. And what annoyed me is how quickly these aliens grew up. Apparently they just bursted out of someone, and in mere minutes they start growing up into big creatures that can easily defeat any human. And how does that make sense when Kirk was able to fight an adult Gorn without so much trouble? I mean, that Gorn was pretty strong, but he was also very slow, and yet here the Gorn are like xenomorphs running on the walls and jumping and eating everyone so easily and spitting acid at people to possess them. How come none of this kind of stuff happened with the Gorn we saw in TOS? And so it doesn't make any sense continuity wise. And it also ruins the morality and the whole message of the original episode in which Kirk spared the Gorn because he realized it's an intelligent being, that maybe it is possible to make peace with them, and now we discover that they're basically monsters who even eat each other all the time, and so none of this makes any sense. And especially at how quickly they grow up. This is like the later Alien movies in which aliens start growing up quicker and quicker. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous even in the original Alien movie, when the alien grew up from the size of a baby to bigger than a man in one day. But at least we can assume a few hours passed, maybe it raided some food storage on the ship or something like that. And in later Alien movies it started becoming more and more ridiculous, especially in Alien 4 and in the Alien vs Predator movies, in which the xenomorph started growing up in mere minutes, like it just burst out of someone and a few minutes later it's fully grown monster bigger than a human. And so that became more and more ridiculous with each movie. And here they do the same mistake, that these little Gorn are growing up so quickly that they manage to defeat humans easily, which makes no sense. How was Kirk able to fight off an adult Gorn when these guys can't even fight off baby ones? And there's no morality at all here. No one ever mentions the fact that maybe it's immoral to kill the babies of an intelligent species. And I'm fine with the occasional monster show and all of that, but they set it up as the same species as the spacefaring adversary that we saw in TOS, which was supposed to become allies with the Federation in the future. And you know, even in Aliens there was more cleverness than this, because in the Aliens movies they often showed that humans would backstab each other, that humans are so greedy, they want money, and so some humans would betray other humans for money, and that maybe in some ways humans are even worse than the xenomorphs. There was a line like that by Ripley when she told Burke that she doesn't know which species is worse, because at least the aliens are not screwing each other up for percentages like humans do. And yet in this episode we see that the Gorn babies are eating each other as well, so that makes even less sense. How are they supposed to be part of an advanced species which became spacefaring if they're literally eating each other up? So this episode kind of lacked any kind of moral messages of any kind at all. It was basically a horror show. They even make predator sounds, and there was a line when Pike said something like, if it bleeds we can kill it. Like he said, I injured one of them so we can defeat them, something similar to that. So there was just so little originality, there was nothing new at all. And at least the episode had the courage to kill off a main character for a change, namely Hammer, who found out that he was infected by the Gorn eggs as well, and he feels they're going to burst any moment because, as I said previously, these aliens reproduce insanely fast. Like he just got infected a few minutes ago, and now the Gorn are going to burst out of him in any second. And then he decides to sacrifice himself, and I was kind of half expecting to see the Gorn chest bursters coming out of him as he's falling down, just like in Alien 3, because so many other things were so similar to all the Alien movies. So maybe they should have went all out, maybe do it like a direct parody, just quote the whole movie, give them the same lines, have the little girls say they mostly come at night mostly, have guy from Galaxy Quest say, it's game over man, it's game over. At least that would have made it even funnier, but the way they did it was like a cheap copy of all these other movies which I want to watch more because they were still better than this. So I don't see the point of remaking something which was good already and making it less good. So that is not something I like. That's the same problem I discussed in my reviews of the Orville. Whenever they copied an idea and didn't improve it in some way, then what's the point of doing that? I'm not opposed to taking some inspiration from other stuff, and the argument can be made that nowadays it's simply so hard to invent something new because it's all been done basically. It's very hard to invent something which no one else invented. I get that, but at least improve it, at least do it better in some way, or do it more comedically, do it as a parody of all the previous stuff, then it can add some entertainment value on top. And you know, if at least visually it looked better in some way, then I could say this is like a good remake because the monsters look scarier or the action scenes are better or whatever, but that is also not even the case. And so what's the point of copying something if you're not going to improve it in some way? And I guess in some ways it is interesting to see the Star Trek characters in that kind of setup. I remember that was the kind of scenarios I was playing in my own head as a kid. I used to imagine stuff like that, like what if a xenomorph was on the Enterprise? How would the Star Trek crew react to that? And I even made edits of that kind of stuff in my old TNG edits. I had scenarios like that of a xenomorph on the Enterprise D. So I don't blame anyone who might enjoy this episode. But to me personally it was so distracting because I kept recognizing how every single moment was lifted from one movie or the other, like no originality at all. That's the biggest problem. They should have added something new of their own, and they didn't, and they shouldn't have disregarded the old continuity. If it's supposed to be a prequel, then how does that tie together with TOS? It makes no sense. And even visually, it's not really that impressive. There were some little bits of some good special effects, but also a lot of scenes of people just walking through dark corridors, which will not be interesting on a rewatch. All the jump scares will mean nothing, especially since we know most of these characters will survive even on first viewing because it's a prequel, so we don't really feel any suspense and danger to these characters who we know will survive. And we have a lot of places of cheap special effects as well. Whenever we see someone's dead body with a pool of blood by their side, the pool of blood always looks really fake, as if it's like a small carpet which they put to look like a puddle of blood, when it's not, because they don't want to use too much real liquid, I guess. And so we had a scene like that in a previous episode as well, when we saw someone's pool of blood and it looked like it's a carpet. So why not at least put some real liquid on the edges so it wouldn't look so obvious? And so stuff like that also loses points in my opinion, because it's not so great visually that it's worth it. If it was so brilliantly remastered version of Aliens in a better way, then at least I would enjoy it visually, but even that is not even the case, because the old Alien movies are still much better than this episode. So if you're going to rip something off, at least make it better in some way, or make it more comedic, make it like a parody. And the only place in which I did feel that it is funny was when Sam Kirk started behaving like Hudson from Aliens, which I found really funny because he was already similar to Guy from Galaxy Quest, who was also kind of like Hudson in how nervous he was all the time, so it kind of clicked together well. So that's the only part I loved in this episode. Most of everything else was just kind of eye-rolling in my opinion. So that's my thoughts on this episode. Let me know what you think and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.